Hey gang, this is Glenn, ready to give you another update on the build of Coupe 674. As you can see, the body's off. In fact, we're just about done with all the mounts to the frame. A little bit of finished welding remains to be done, and then this thing is going off to the paint shop on Saturday. As you can see, the body's off. The hood is over there in the corner on a little stand that can roll around the shop. It's still fairly stable. And the body is hanging from the ceiling right there. I've got enough room to walk under it, but I've got a duck. It's a pretty good solution for getting it out of the way. I was very careful though to put some brackets in between the left and right sides at strategic places. Just trying to be sure that this thing doesn't move around on me too much. Also, I paid some attention, and thank you to Mr. Sides for pointing out a couple of potential problems. Put the ropes about where they need to be to support the heavier parts of it without putting strain on any weaker parts. So I think that's looking pretty good. Onto the frame. When I mentioned, some of these things connect to things I mentioned when I described the body work. First of all, this bar right here is the mount for the firewall. As I mentioned, the firewall is going to be set forward a couple of inches because the engine is going to be forward a couple of inches, and this should give me nice support for a firewall. Also, I have the Wilwood pedal box that I'm using, and I just did confirm that indeed I have the same interference issue that other people did. So cut this notch into the frame, added a substantial piece on the outside to give that some strength. Should be good, clears the pedal, should be plenty strong. The other thing I posted up a couple days ago was the pass-throughs for the undercar exhaust. Undercar exhaust is a big time want by me on this build. I'm not sure if we can pull it off, but I'm going to go for it. What we did is burn some holes in the 4-inch tube and put a piece of 3.5-inch OD 1/4-inch wall tube through it, welded it all good and solid. Looks pretty good. Onto the doors, which is a big deal with this project. First here you can see that this member right here that formed the sill of the door, cut that off and built another one in here a couple of inches lower. That lets me drop the sill by a couple of inches, which makes room for the door to be extended downward for the window regulator. Also at the back of the door, there's a piece of 3/16 plate that's going to be the mount for the striker. And if you notice a couple welds and drill holes around it, that is for the sake of making this thing removable. I can actually pull this whole thing off, which is going to make it pretty easy to pull the body off and on. During the process of thinking this through, I realized that when the body was coming off, it was going to have to be tilted nose up for the first part of its movement. And with this plate flat against the back of the door jamb, that wasn't going to be possible, so I made that plate removable. Anchored by a couple of 5/16 bolts, I think it'll be pretty solid. Also, the rear corner of the bodywork here is moved back a couple of inches. I added a 2x2 member coming off the 4-inch tube to pick up a new support for the bottom corner of the door frame, and that's all pretty solid. I also had to replace the tube that goes down to the 4-inch main tube. So this member is going to be not any more in the way than the one that was there before, so I think I'm okay with tire clearance. That's one thing I'm just a little bit concerned about, but I think with the offsets I'll be fine. And here we have the diff. As I mentioned, I'm putting a rear bracket in that has a rubber bushing out of the old Mustang Cobras that had the IRS. So I think it's up to the job. I designed a bracket for that, put it into place. It still needs to be finish welded. I added some Going to be adding some gusseting there to really strengthen that thing up. But I'm pretty happy with that. That's going to be finished welded in on Saturday when my buddy, the expert welder, shows up, and we'll knock that out. And as I said, then this thing is off to paint. One other thing to describe is the changes to the structure in the rear. The upper bar is factory. Most of the angle of everything on the back here is factory. However, the rest of the supporting structure is all new. We picked up from this 2x3 with a 2x2 going straight back to catch another 2x2 that makes its way across the tail to another piece on the other side, and that gives me very solid protection for the back of the car, especially the fuel tank. Hanging from the bottom of all that is the new trunk floor. It's about 6 inches lower than original. Trying to get a good angle on it. Basically, it starts from this horizontal member going across between the round tubes that form the X-brace behind the diff. So we welded a bar across there, cut out some other pieces, and constructed a new floor that comes back here and mates up with the tail. You'll notice the brackets bolt welded onto that lower member. Those will mate up to brackets that I've bonded to the tail of the inside of the car. So that's how the rear of the car is going to be held in place, not by the bolts through the tail lights, but rather by these brackets that made up with other brackets that are bonded to the body. Finally, there's a couple of round holes in these stringers on the floor, and those are actually going to be the supports for the fuel tank. I got a custom fuel tank from RCI. It's going to hold about 17 gallons according to their advertising. I think it's probably closer to 14, but there it is. It measures 6 inches deep at the rear and 8 inches deep at the front. That's going to taper very nicely and tuck in under the bodywork just the way I want it to. Got all the pickups. It's not set up for an internal fuel pump, so I'll go external. And I got the angled inlet, so that'll give a pretty direct shot from the filler down into the tank. I think that's about it for now. Like I said, we're going to do some finish welding on Saturday, and then this thing is taking a ride to a paint shop, so the frame will get painted up, and I can continue on with the rest of the build. Thanks for looking, everybody. Talk to you later.